The lobby of the Whitmore Grand shimmered under the morning light, polished marble floors, reflecting the chandeliers above hushed voices, blending with the soft click of designer heels. Everything was immaculate, controlled, perfect, just the way Caroline Whitmore had been raised to believe life should be. She stood near the grand staircase, watching the hotel's staff move like pieces on a chessboard. Each step, each gesture was rehearsed. Flawless. Her mother used to say that appearances were everything, especially when your name was carved into buildings. But Caroline wasn't thinking about appearances. Not really. She was thinking about the man kneeling in front of the fountain, tightening a loose valve under the base. His uniform was worn, his posture slightly hunched. From behind, he was just another maintenance worker. But when he looked up just for a second, and their eyes met, her breath caught. It couldn't be, could it? Her assistant Jennifer hovered beside her, clutching a tablet. The board meeting's been moved up an hour, and the press is still waiting on your comment about the riverfront expansion. Push the meeting, Caroline said quietly. Jennifer blinked. Ma'am. Caroline stepped forward, heels tapping against the stone, every movement drawing attention in the lobby that had just begun to notice her arrival. People stopped mid-conversation. Bellhops paused. Even the concierge glanced up from the desk. The man Micah she thought had gone back to his work, oblivious, or maybe pretending to be. Caroline stopped 3 feet from him. He didn't look up this time. "Excuse me," she said softly. Micah turned slowly. His eyes were tired, framed by lines that said he hadn't had a full night's sleep in weeks. But his face. It was him. It was him. "Can I help you, ma'am?" The southern drawl was softer, now older. But the voice was the same. 15 years hadn't erased it. Caroline didn't answer. Instead, she took one step closer, reached out, and pressed her lips gently to his cheek. A sharp gasp cut the air. Then silence. Micah froze. Everyone else did too. Caroline pulled back and met his eyes again. For a second, something flickered in his expression, confusion, disbelief. Fear. Then it was gone. "Welcome back to the Whitmore Grand," she said, and turned without another word. As she walked away, the room behind her came alive with hushed whispers. She didn't stop. She didn't explain. She didn't have to. Upstairs in her private office overlooking Savannah's River Street, Caroline stood by the window and tried to slow her pulse. The city below buzzed with its usual charm tourists holding coffee cups and maps, riverboats, humming in the distance, horse-drawn carriages clattering over cobblestone streets. It was the kind of postcard perfect view that should have felt comforting. It didn't. She touched her cheek, the one opposite, where her lips had landed on his. What had she just done? "Are you okay?" Jennifer asked from the doorway, her voice cautious. Caroline nodded, though she didn't mean it. Jennifer stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "People are talking about what happened in the lobby." "I'm sure they are." "Who was he?" Caroline stared out the window. "Someone I thought I'd never see again." "You know him." Caroline didn't answer right away. "Have you ever had a moment in your life that changed everything? But you didn't realize it until years later. Jennifer stayed quiet. "I was 12. It was a church retreat near Tybee Island. I got separated from my group during a storm. I panicked, thought I was going to be out there all night. And then this boy, he couldn't have been older than 15, found me. And that's him, I think so. He sat with me until someone found us. Didn't ask for anything. Didn't try to impress me. He just stayed, told me it was going to be okay. And now he works maintenance for your family's hotel." Caroline's jaw tightened. Life's strange that way. Jennifer hesitated. "Should I pull his file?" "No. Not yet. But I said no." Outside the office, the day resumed. Business meetings, vendor calls, PR updates. Caroline handled them all with practiced precision, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the man downstairs, Micah Dawson. The name came back to her just before lunch when Monica from housekeeping stopped by to review some schedule changes. "Oh, you mean Micah," she said when Caroline asked about the lobby repairs. "Yeah, he's been with us for a couple months. Hard worker. Real quiet. Got a daughter, I think." Caroline blinked. "He does, yep. Must be about 7 or 8. Real sweet. I've seen her at pickup with his neighbor. He's a good dad. Always rushing out right on time to get home." That stopped Caroline in her tracks. She had spent her adult life avoiding attachments, steering clear of anyone who didn't understand her world, or worse, only wanted her for it. But Micah? He had a child. A life. And still there was something in his eyes this morning. A flicker of the same courage she remembered from that night in the woods. She hadn't even thanked him then. He left before she could. Now he was under her roof. And he didn't even remember her. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees and bathed the city in gold, Carolyn sat alone in the hotel's rooftop garden, her favorite place to think. Below lights twinkled across the Savannah River, and jazz music drifted from a nearby courtyard. She opened her journal, the same one she'd been writing in since college. On a fresh page, she wrote, "What if the person who saved you once doesn't even know who you are?" She stared at the words for a long time, then quietly closed the book. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. Micah hadn't said a word since it happened. He rode the service elevator up to the third-floor utility corridor toolkit in hand, trying to convince himself that he hadn't just been kissed by Savannah royalty in front of half the hotel staff, that it hadn't really happened, that maybe she mistook him for someone else. But he knew better. The silence in the elevator was louder than anything. And when the doors slid open with a soft chime, he stepped out into the quiet hallway and leaned against the wall, letting the truth settle in his chest like a stone. Caroline Whitmore kissed him. Not a friend, not a neighbor, not someone he knew in passing. Caroline Whitmore. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew it meant something. And that scared him more than anything. Downstairs, the whispers had already taken root. Micah had seen the way Charles Benton squinted at him when he passed by the service desk. The way Monica from housekeeping paused a beat too long when she handed him his clipboard. No one said anything outright. They didn't have to. People in places like this never said what they were really thinking. They just let it hang in the air like humidity. Heavy, constant. He opened the maintenance door and closed it behind him, grateful for the dim solitude of the back rooms. This part of the hotel wasn't glamorous. It smelled like paint thinner and old pipe sealant. But it was quiet. Honest. And for 10 minutes, Micah could just breathe. Except he couldn't. Not really. Because her face kept flashing through his mind, the way she had looked at him, like she'd been searching for him. He shook his head and opened the maintenance log. Leaky sink in 402, broken light in the north stairwell. Ice machine on 5 acting up again. Things he could fix. Problems that made sense. He didn't hear the knock at first. It came again soft, like someone unsure if they should be knocking at all. Micah opened the door expecting Monica or maybe kitchen staff. Instead, Caroline Whitmore stood in the hallway, her arms crossed, eyes uncertain. His heart jumped. "Ma'am, Miss Whitmore." She held up a hand. "Please don't call me that." Micah swallowed. "Okay. Carolyn." She gave a small, nervous smile. "Do you have a minute?" Micah stepped aside to let her in. The room was barely big enough for the two of them, utility shelves, a mop sink, and a folding chair. Caroline glanced around. "You work in here, I work everywhere," he said, voice calm, but guarded. "This is just where the logs stay." She nodded and looked down at her shoes. He noticed the heels low, practical, but still polished. Everything about her was controlled. But the way she shifted her weight, the way her hands fiddled with her ring, it all betrayed her nerves. "I'm sorry about this morning," she said softly. Micah raised an eyebrow. "About what exactly?" She met his eyes. "About surprising you. I shouldn't have. I acted on instinct. What kind of instinct makes you walk up to someone and kiss them out of nowhere?" Caroline hesitated, then said, "Recognition." That word landed harder than he expected. She looked at him like she was measuring something invisible. "You don't remember me, do you?" Micah blinked. "Should I?" She took a breath, then stepped closer, lowering her voice like she was about to share something sacred. 17 years ago. Tybee Island, church retreat. You found me in the woods. Micah's mind tried to reach back. Tybee, summer, trees, a girl crying in the dark. It was hazy, fragmented. But something about her voice, the lavender perfume, the way she had said, "Welcome back," that morning, it had all stirred something in him. "I remember," someone he said slowly, "I was just a kid." "So was I." Caroline smiled gently. "But you sat with me until help came. You told me it was going to be okay." Micah's chest tightened. "I never forgot," she added. "Even when my parents brushed it off, even when life moved on. I remembered your name, your voice, how calm you were, even when I wasn't." Micah didn't know what to say. It wasn't the kind of story he was used to being part of. Most days he was just trying to hold things together, busted pipes, overdue bills, Sophie's school schedule. He wasn't the boy from someone else's memory. "I didn't know it was you until today," she continued. "Not until I saw your eyes." Micah let that sit between them. He finally said, "Why didn't you say something instead of doing that?" She laughed quietly. "Because I panicked. Because I didn't know what to say. And maybe because it felt like something out of a dream." There was a long pause. Then Micah looked at her with something between suspicion and wonder. "Do you always kiss people from your dreams?" he asked, not quite smiling. She tilted her head, and for a moment she wasn't the heiress of a hotel empire. She was just a woman standing in a room too small for the emotions pressing in. "Only the ones I've been looking for," she said. Micah looked away, his voice quieter now. "I've got a daughter, Sophie. She's 7. "I know," he glanced up. "You know Monica told me?" "I didn't ask. She mentioned it when we talked earlier." Micah nodded. "I don't do games, Caroline. I don't have time for them." "I'm not here to play," she said simply. He studied her for a moment, then opened the maintenance log again. Part reflex, part defense. Caroline didn't move. Finally, she said, "I'd like to offer you a different position." Micah froze. "Excuse me, I want you on my team. Not as maintenance, as my assistant." He looked up sharply. "Why would you do that?" "Because I trust you," she said. "And because I know you're not going to lie to me or say yes to impress me or pretend to be something you're not. I need someone like that." Micah stared at her. "You're serious," she nodded. He exhaled slowly. "What about your people?" "Charles Benton's going to lose his mind. He's not the one making decisions. And what happens when your family finds out?" When the people upstairs start asking questions, Caroline stepped closer, her voice low. "Let them ask." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Micah said, "I'll think about it." She smiled. "That's all I'm asking." As she left, the door clicked softly behind her. Micah stood still, the log still open in his hand, but unreadable now. In the silence, he could hear her voice again. Only the ones I've been looking for. He didn't know what this was, but it wasn't nothing. And that scared him more than anything. Micah stood at the stove stirring a pot of boxed macaroni and cheese, while Sophie sat cross-legged at the kitchen table coloring quietly under the warm hum of the overhead light. Their apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, faded hardwood floors, and a balcony that looked out over the narrow alley between buildings, but it had become their world. Daddy Sophie said without looking up, "Do you know any princesses?" Micah paused, spoon in midair. Princesses. She nodded, eyes still on her drawing. Like real ones. Not the kind from the library books. He chuckled, shaking his head. Can't say I do. Why? Sophie shrugged. Just wondering. He set the spoon down and turned to look at her, arms crossed. What kind of question is that, Peanut? She finally looked up, lifting her paper like it was evidence. On it, she'd drawn a tall woman in a fancy dress standing next to a man in work clothes, holding a wrench. A little girl stood between them, holding both their hands. Micah's throat tightened. Is that us? He asked gently. Sophie grinned. Kind of. But the lady's someone new. She looks like the lady from the lobby. He blinked. What lady, you know? The one who kissed you. Micah leaned against the counter, running a hand down his face. How do you even know about that? Monica told Ms. Nadine. Sophie said matter-of-factly. Ms. Nadine told me when I came home. She said you got kissed like in the movies. Micah shook his head, laughing under his breath. It wasn't like in the movies. Sophie narrowed her eyes. Was it nice? He paused, then shrugged. I guess. Sophie smiled, going back to her drawing. You should talk to her again. Micah didn't answer. The water on the stove had started to boil over, hissing against the burner. He turned the heat down, but his thoughts weren't on the stove. They were on Caroline, and what the hell he was supposed to do next. The next morning, the hotel felt different. Or maybe he did. People watched him more closely. Monica gave him a warm smile, but others, especially in management, kept their distance. Not in an obvious way, just enough to make him feel like a hair out of place on a tailored suit. When he walked past the front desk, Charles Benton's voice followed him like a draft. Mr. Dawson, he called out, tone clipped. Micah turned. Yes, Sir Charles was a tall man in his early 60s with a sharp jawline and colder eyes. He'd worked for the Whitmores since before Micah was born, ran the hotel like a captain ran a ship, tight and silent. I hear you had a conversation with Ms. Whitmore yesterday. Micah nodded slowly. Yes, sir. I'm sure you're aware of the unusual circumstances surrounding her return. Micah kept his expression steady. Didn't realize I was involved in them. Charles stepped closer, his voice dropping just enough to feel personal. Ms. Whitmore is carrying a great deal on her shoulders. The Whitmore legacy, the expansion project, the family name. She doesn't need distractions. Micah's jaw tensed. I'm not trying to be one. Charles gave a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. Good. Because upward movement in this hotel is earned slowly, Mr. Dawson, through silence, discipline, and reliability, not through charm. Micah didn't reply. He didn't need to. He just nodded once and walked away. In the break room, Monica was pouring coffee when he came in. She glanced at him over her glasses. You okay? She asked, like she already knew he wasn't. Micah leaned against the counter. Charles had a little chat with me. Oh, he's sniffing around already, huh? Monica rolled her eyes. That man's like a dog with a bone when anything shifts. I didn't ask for any of this. I know you didn't. That's why it's happening. He looked at her, confused. People like Caroline, Monica said softly. They don't step down from the clouds for just anyone. And when they do, the rest of the sky doesn't like it. Micah stared into his coffee. the dark swirl of cream and bitterness matching the knot in his stomach. Later that afternoon, he found an envelope slid under the door of the maintenance office. No name. Just his title on the front, Micah Dawson. Facilities inside a folded note in Caroline's handwriting. Conference room C5:30 p.m. No obligations, just talk. He stared at the paper for a long time, then checked his watch. 4:57. By 5:30, he stood outside the small conference room on the second floor, heart thudding like he was back in high school. When he stepped in, Caroline was already there. No assistants, no laptop, just her and 2 mugs of coffee on the table. "I wasn't sure if you'd come," she said. "I wasn't sure either," he admitted. She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit," he did cautiously. "I wanted to apologize again," she said, voice softer than usual. "Not for remembering you, but for making it your problem." Micah looked at her, really looked this time. She wasn't the polished heiress from the magazines. Her makeup was subtle, her blazer hanging on the back of the chair, her hair slightly messy from the long day. "Why me?" he asked. Caroline tilted her head. "You could have anyone. Someone who knows this world, who makes sense in it. But you remembered one night in the woods with a scared boy who didn't even know your name." "Because you made me feel safe," she said. "And that's rare, even now." Micah exhaled slowly. "I'm not that boy anymore. I know. You're better." There was silence. Then she added, "I'm not offering you a fairy tale. I know how this looks. I know what people are saying." Micah nodded. "Charles warned me this morning. I'm sure he did. So, what happens if I say yes to that job?" She leaned forward. "Then you become the one person in this place I can trust completely. And if you say no, I'll understand. I'll step back." He looked at her steady now. "You sure you're ready to have someone in your corner who doesn't care about your last name?" Her voice caught. "That's all I've ever wanted." Micah sat back, heart still racing. "I'll give it a shot," he said finally. "But I'm not changing who I am." Caroline smiled. "I was counting on that. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way." The announcement came the next morning just after breakfast service ended. It was printed on crisp white paper, posted quietly behind the staff check-in desk. The kind of notice most employees skimmed without a second glance, except this one had a name on it. Effective immediately, Micah Dawson will be transitioning into a new role as Special Assistant to Vice President Caroline Whitmore. Please direct any related inquiries to Executive Administration. Micah read it once, then twice. The words didn't change, but the weight of them settled across his shoulders like a coat he hadn't asked to wear. He felt the ripple before he even turned around. Voices lowered behind coffee cups. Footsteps slowed when he passed. He was no longer just the guy who fixed the pipes and cleared out filters. He was someone to talk about. Monica approached him first, of course. She tapped his shoulder as he moved through the lower hallway. "Didn't think you'd actually do it," she said, not unkindly. Micah offered a dry smile. "Me either." "Well," she said, patting his arm, "watch your back. And keep your head on. This place likes to eat good people." Before he could ask what that meant, she was gone. At 10 a.m., Jennifer found him at the elevator and handed him a tablet and a neatly typed schedule. "Welcome to the other side," she said, smiling, though he noticed her eyes didn't quite match her tone. "Caroline's expecting you upstairs in the Whitmore suite. I assume you know where that is?" "I fixed the faucet twice," Micah replied. Jennifer blinked, then nodded. "Right." The ride up to the executive floor was too smooth, too quiet, the kind of silence that made every second feel longer than it should. When the elevator doors opened, Caroline was standing there, waiting. She wore a navy blazer cream blouse and that same calm expression that always looked a little too polished for real life. "Ready?" she asked. Micah nodded, adjusting the strap of the messenger bag he'd borrowed from Monica's son. She led him into the suite, and everything about it felt designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city walls lined with awards and family portraits, a sleek desk that looked like it cost more than his car. "You'll sit here," she said, pointing to the desk beside hers. "We'll start small emails scheduling vendor coordination. Once you're settled, I'll loop you in on the expansion plans." Micah sat slowly, trying not to feel like a misplaced puzzle piece. She sat across from him, clasped her hands on the desk. "I know this is a shift, but I chose you because I trust you. That's not going to change." He nodded, unsure how to respond to that. Caroline paused, then added, "We keep everything professional while we're up here. No exceptions, if that's not comfortable." "It is," Micah interrupted. "I get it." She studied him for a beat. "All right, let's get started." For the next 2 hours, they worked in sync. Surprisingly so. She dictated emails, he typed. She paused during a call to Mouth Vendor Report tab 3, he already had it open. There was a rhythm to it, a quiet flow that didn't need explaining. It was only when they broke for lunch that things shifted. Carolyn stood, walked over to the window and looked out across Savannah's sprawl of rooftops and trees. Micah followed, stopping a few feet away. "I thought this would feel more strange," she said, arms folded. "But it doesn't." "Because you're used to people adjusting to your world," he said before he could stop himself. She looked at him a little surprised, then smiled. "That's fair." Micah looked out the window too. "You ever wonder what it's like on the other side of this glass? All the way down there, all the time?" He didn't believe her. Carolyn turned toward him, more serious now. "Micah, I need you to know something." He waited. "You're not here because of what happened in the lobby. You're not here because I feel guilty or because I'm chasing some childhood memory. You're here because I saw the way you work. Quiet. Precise. No pretense." Micah looked at her. Even now, with everyone watching, she nodded. Especially now. Before he could answer, the suite door opened. A tall man in his early 30s stepped in expensive suit-sculpted hair, the air of someone who never heard the word no. Bradley Whitmore. "Caroline," he said, not bothering to hide his surprise. His eyes flicked to Micah. "I didn't realize you were conducting interviews." Caroline's voice was cool. "I'm not." Bradley stepped closer. "So you've hired—" "Who exactly?" Micah held his gaze, but said nothing. "Micah Dawson, Caroline," said plainly. "He's my assistant." Bradley turned to his sister, the smile dropping. "That's a joke, right? No." He looked back at Micah. "You're a janitor." Micah's shoulders tightened, but he didn't move. Carolyn's voice cut through the tension. "He was maintenance. Now he's with me. That's the end of the conversation." Bradley laughed low and bitter. "Do you know what people are saying downstairs?" Carolyn stepped forward. "I don't care." Bradley's eyes narrowed. "You should." Then he left. The silence that followed was sharp. Micah let out a breath. "Well, that went well." Caroline sighed. "Ignore him. I've been ignored by worse." She smiled faintly but didn't laugh. Micah looked at her. "You sure about all this?" Caroline didn't flinch. Every word. Later that night, as Micah walked Sophie home from Nadine's apartment, she skipped along the sidewalk, humming. "Daddy," she asked, looking up. "Yeah, Peanut." "What do you do now?" Micah thought for a second, then smiled. "I work for a princess." The sun hadn't even cleared the tops of the buildings when Micah arrived at the Whitmore Grand the next morning, coffee in hand, and sleep barely behind him. Savannah's streets were still quiet, save for the clatter of delivery trucks and the soft sweep of brooms brushing against sidewalks. But inside the hotel, the air already buzzed with its usual hum of tension and performance. He stepped into the executive suite and found Caroline exactly where he expected, behind her desk, blazer off sleeves, rolled up deep in conversation over speakerphone with a legal team about zoning permits for the riverfront expansion. She looked up, caught his eye, and gave a nod that said, "Good morning," without breaking stride. Micah moved through the room without a sound, setting her coffee down beside her left hand, like he'd done it 100 times. She reached for it, instinctively, still talking. "Those units need to be finalized by the end of next week, or the council will drag us into another round of public hearings." "Yes." "Confirm with George at City Planning." "No, I'll handle the board." "Thanks." She ended the call, sighed, then finally looked at Micah. "You're a lifesaver," she said, lifting the coffee. He leaned against the desk beside hers. "You've been at it for hours, since 5. Micah raised an eyebrow. "You know that's not normal, right?" She smiled, tired but warm. "Neither is hiring a single dad from maintenance to be your assistant, and yet here we are." There was a soft knock at the door before he could answer. Jennifer stepped in, face unreadable. "Caroline." "Your father called. He wants you at brunch this Sunday. Family only." Caroline stilled. Jennifer continued. "He said, and I quote, 'Tell her to leave her charity projects at home.'" Micah shifted in his chair. Caroline's jaw tensed, but she only said, "Tell him I'll be there. Alone." Jennifer nodded and left, leaving a silence that wrapped around them like a too-tight scarf. Micah finally said, "You didn't have to do that." "I did," Caroline replied quietly. "He doesn't get to define you. I'm not trying to cause trouble. You're not. They're just not used to me choosing things for myself." Micah looked at her for a long beat. "You ever regret it?" She glanced at him. "What, being born into all this?" The question landed heavy. Carolyn leaned back, staring up at the ceiling like she was counting every recessed light. "Sometimes I wonder who I'd be if my last name was something no one recognized. If I grew up in a house with creaky floors and a yard full of weeds. Maybe I'd know what it feels like to want something without already owning it." Micah didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Later that afternoon, Carolyn asked him to join her for a walkthrough of the hotel's West Wing. Part of the original building now closed off for renovations. She wanted to see it firsthand before making any decisions about preservation. As they moved through the dim, dusty corridors, Micah ran his fingers along the aged wood paneling. "This place has bones," he murmured. Caroline smiled. "You talk about buildings like they're people." "They kind of are," he replied. "You just have to listen." She paused in front of an old ballroom, its windows boarded light leaking through in slanted shafts. "This used to be my favorite room," she said softly. "When I was little, I'd sneak in here after dinner parties and pretend I was the only one in the world." Micah turned to her. "Must have been nice." "It was lonely," she admitted. "My parents were always entertaining someone. I think they loved guests more than they loved each other." He watched her as she traced the edge of a dusty windowsill. Her vulnerability hit him unexpectedly quiet, raw, and utterly real. "You're not what I expected," he said before he could stop himself. Caroline looked over her shoulder. Good or bad, still deciding. She laughed, and for a moment something between them softened. Then footsteps echoed behind them. "Miss Whitmore." They turned. Charles Benton stood at the doorway, expression-pinched voice polite but tight. "I was told you were in the West Wing. I wasn't aware this area was cleared for walkthroughs." Caroline straightened, her tone neutral. "I cleared it," Charles glanced at Micah. "And Mr. Dawson is accompanying you as my assistant." Of course. He smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. Just be mindful of the reports circulating among senior staff. There's chatter, I'm aware, Caroline said. Charles nodded once. Very good. He turned and walked away, his disapproval lingering long after he did. Caroline exhaled slowly. They're not going to stop. Micah shrugged. Let them talk. I don't want them talking about you. They're not. They're talking about you. I'm just the excuse. She looked at him, then down. That makes it worse. Micah stepped a little closer, voice low. What do you want out of this, Caroline, really? She hesitated. Honestly, always. I want to be around someone who doesn't need me to prove anything. He let that sit in the quiet. Then stop trying so hard, he said. Their eyes met. Something passed between them, unspoken, but thick with meaning. The moment was broken by her phone buzzing. She checked it, frowning. It's Sophie's school. Micah's heart skipped. What? Caroline answered quickly. Yes, this is Caroline Whitmore. What's wrong? She listened, nodding. He's on his way. Thank you. She ended the call and looked up. She's fine. Just a fever. But they need someone to pick her up. Micah grabbed his phone and keys. Caroline stopped him. I'll go. What you're working. And I'm available. Micah hesitated. Are you sure I want to meet her anyway? He stared at her for a moment, then nodded. Caroline smiled. Tell her I'm coming, and that I bring applesauce. And just like that, she was gone. Micah stood there in the quiet hallway of a hotel that suddenly didn't feel quite so cold anymore. The school nurse's office smelled faintly of disinfectant and orange hand sanitizer. Caroline stood by the small cot, one hand resting lightly on her designer purse, the other gently tucking a blanket around the small figure curled up beneath it. Sophie's eyes fluttered open as the sunlight from the high window caught her cheek. Her forehead was flushed, her hair a little damp with sweat. You're not my daddy, she whispered, voice soft and scratchy. Caroline crouched beside the cot, her heels clicking softly on the linoleum. Nope. But I'm a friend of his, Sophie blinked. Do you work at the hotel I do? Sophie tilted her head. Are you the fancy one? Caroline stifled a laugh. I guess that depends who you ask. The girl gave a small smile, eyes half-lidded. Ms. Nadine says you kissed my daddy. Caroline's breath caught. She told you that Sophie nodded. She said it's like a fairy tale. Caroline paused, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small applesauce cup and a plastic spoon. Well, for now, how about applesauce? Sophie sat up slowly. The good kind cinnamon? A slow smile spread across the girl's face. Okay. You can stay. Caroline fed her the first bite, watching as Sophie relaxed with every spoonful. For all her boardroom experience, she'd never felt so delicate in conversation. This wasn't negotiation. It wasn't about headlines or expansion approvals. This was someone small and honest and in need of gentleness. Micah had raised her well. After a few minutes, Sophie leaned her head against Caroline's shoulder. Will you tell my dad I wasn't scared? Caroline nodded, her voice catching slightly. Of course. When Micah arrived 10 minutes later, breathless and flushed from rushing across town, he paused in the doorway. What he saw stopped him cold. Caroline on the tiny bench holding his daughter like she'd done it 100 times before. Sophie was asleep again, nestled into her arm, the empty applesauce cup resting beside her. Caroline looked up. Their eyes met. She didn't speak. She just nodded. Micah stepped into the room, quietly crouched down, and gently gathered Sophie into his arms. She's okay, Caroline whispered. I know. He looked down at his daughter, then back at her. You didn't have to do this. I wanted to. Micah held her gaze, the air between them thick with something he didn't have words for yet. Thank you, he said. Caroline brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Anytime. That night back at their apartment, Micah laid Sophie down and sat beside her until her breathing evened out. Then he stepped out onto the balcony, the city lights stretching wide and soft across the horizon. He pulled out his phone. Micah, she asked if you were a princess again. Caroline. And what did you say, Micah? I said maybe. But only the good kind. A moment passed before her reply came through. Caroline. I didn't know there were bad kinds. Micah. There are. They just wear better shoes. He smiled. Then her next message came through. Caroline. Come to the garden tomorrow, before work. 7 a.m., I'll bring coffee. Micah stared at the screen for a while, then slipped the phone into his pocket and leaned against the railing, the cool air brushing against his skin. The rooftop garden was quiet the next morning, bathed in soft gold light as the city slowly woke beneath it. Flowers nodded gently in the breeze. Caroline was already there sitting on the edge of a stone bench, 2 coffees beside her. She didn't wear her usual blazer, just a light sweater and jeans, hair loosely tied back, face fresh and open in a way he rarely saw. Micah approached, took the coffee she handed him, and sat beside her. You okay? She asked. He nodded. She's better. Still a little warm, but I kept her home. Carolyn sipped her drink. She's something. Yeah, Micah said, watching the clouds drift by. She's everything. Silence settled between them, comfortable and full of unsaid things. Carolyn turned to him. Can I ask you something personal? He shrugged. Sure. Where's her mom? Micah looked down at his hands. She left, he said after a pause. When Sophie was 2, said she wasn't cut out for this kind of life. Too tired, too hard, too small. I'm sorry. He nodded once. I stopped being sorry a long time ago. It's just me and Sophie now. That's how it's always been. And I've never needed it to be more. Caroline studied him for a long moment. So what do you need now? Micah turned to her. I don't know. But lately, he didn't finish. Caroline didn't press. Instead, she leaned closer, her shoulder brushing his. Do you know what I was thinking last night? He shook his head. I realized you're the only person in my life who's never tried to impress me, never tried to get something out of me. You just see me. Micah looked at her quietly. I've been in boardrooms where men twice your age bend over backward to please me. I've been on dates where I could feel the checklist ticking off in their heads. My family, my name, my money. She paused. You're the only one who makes me feel like none of that matters. Micah set his coffee down. That's because it doesn't. Their eyes locked. Caroline, he said, voice lower now. I've been building a life around keeping things simple, clear, safe, for me, for Sophie. I don't bring people in easily. I know. But you're in it now, whether I meant for it or not. Her breath caught. I'm not asking for perfect, he added. I'm just asking that if this turns into something, it stays real. She nodded slowly. I wouldn't want it any other way. And for the first time since they met again, Micah reached out, not with words, but with his hand resting gently over hers. She didn't pull away. The moment was quiet. Earned. Real. The rain started just after lunch. Not a storm, just a quiet, steady drizzle that softened the edges of the city and wrapped the hotel in a gray hush. Inside, the Whitmore Grand business carried on as usual. Guests checked in under umbrellas, staff moved briskly with trays and towels, and the hum of quiet conversation echoed through the lobby like a low symphony. But upstairs in the executive suite, something had shifted. Micah sat across from Caroline, his laptop open but untouched. She was staring out the window, her phone silent for once, coffee untouched. "You ever get tired of pretending?" she asked suddenly. Micah glanced up. Pretending what she didn't turn. Like everything's fine. Like all the pressure and the weight and the expectations don't get to you. Micah leaned back. "All the time. But I don't think I'm very good at hiding it." She smiled faintly. "You are. You just don't notice." There was a long pause. Then she said, "My father called again. He wants me to speak at the donor gala next month." Micah raised an eyebrow. "You're not going, I will," she said. "But not for him, for the family name, for the hotel, the people who work here, people like you." Micah looked at her carefully. "And where do you fit in?" Caroline finally turned to him. "That's the thing I don't know anymore." Micah didn't speak, just waited. She sighed, dropping her shoulders a little. "Sometimes I feel like I've been performing since I was 10. Smile at the investors. Shake hands with the board. Be the perfect daughter in public. And when it gets quiet, I don't know if there's anything real left." Micah stood, walked over to her window, and looked out at the rain. "Can I show you something?" he asked. Caroline looked at him. "Now." "Yeah. Grab your coat." She hesitated for a split second, then nodded. They took the service elevator down to the garage where Micah's truck sat wedged between luxury sedans. It wasn't much to look at, 10 years old, a little rust around the edges, but it ran clean, and Sophie had named it Blueberry after the air freshener that had long since stopped working. Caroline slid into the passenger seat, brushing a few crayon wrappers aside without comment. "You sure you want to do this in the rain?" she asked. Micah started the engine. "Trust me." They drove in silence for a while, city sounds muffled by the soft patter of water on the windshield. Micah took turns, without announcing them, weaving through familiar back streets until the buildings gave way to trees and the road opened into something quieter, more hidden. Eventually, he pulled off into a gravel lot near a small overlook just past the old paper mill on the edge of the river. Carolyn looked around. "Where are we?" "My mom used to bring me here when I was a kid. Said it was where she came when she needed to remember what mattered." Caroline stepped out into the mist, wrapping her coat tighter around her. Micah joined her hands in his pockets. Below them, the river moved slow and wide, its surface rippling with rain. The waterline was higher than usual. Fog clung to the treetops, muffling the world in silver. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "Yeah. And no one ever comes here. Not anymore." They stood in silence for a long moment. The only sounds were the rain and the wind in the leaves. Then Micah said, "This is where I made the decision to keep Sophie." Caroline turned to him slowly. "What do you mean he kept his eyes on the river? When her mom left, I was barely 20. I didn't have a job that paid more than minimum wage. No savings, no family support. I sat right here for hours thinking maybe someone else would give her a better life." He swallowed, voice rougher now. "But then I thought about all the things I could teach her, even if I couldn't give her much. How to be kind, how to be strong, how to love people with your whole heart even when they don't deserve it. And I realized, maybe I wasn't broken. Maybe I was just starting." Caroline said nothing, but her eyes shimmered. "I come here when I forget who I am," he added. She stepped closer. "Then I'm glad you brought me." Their eyes met, and something unsaid stretched between them, tight and trembling. "I've spent my whole life trying to be seen," she whispered. "But when I'm with you, I feel like I am." Micah looked at her, something shifting behind his expression. "I don't want to be just a moment in your story, Caroline. You're not. I mean it. I'm not a headline or a distraction. I'm a father, a worker, A man who's built something from nothing. I don't need saving. Caroline reached for his hand. I don't want to save you, she said. I just want to stand beside you. And in that moment, under the gray sky and steady rain, Micah let his fingers lace through hers. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. And for both of them, that was everything. The hum of the hotel returned as they pulled back into the parking garage, the warm interior lights of the Whitmore Grand glowing against the dark afternoon drizzle. Neither of them said much during the drive back. The silence wasn't heavy. It was full quiet in the way that comes when you've said something that can't be unsaid. Micah parked in his usual spot. Caroline didn't move to get out right away. She looked out the window, watching the droplets slide down the glass. That place, she said, softly. By the river. It felt like the first honest breath I've taken in years. Micah glanced at her. You can go there any time. I wouldn't want to go without you. He smiled just a little. I think that's the point. Inside the hotel, the contrast was stark. No mist, no river, just gleaming floors and gold-plated name badges, and people who smiled with their mouths, but never with their eyes. The moment they stepped through the lobby, they weren't just Micah and Caroline anymore. They were something to be observed. Judged. Jennifer met them near the elevator's tablet, in hand, eyes flicking to their joined hands, before she masked it with a cool nod. Caroline, your father's waiting in the lounge upstairs. He arrived early. Caroline's spine straightened. Of course he did. He brought your mother. Micah felt her fingers tense in his. She let go gently and turned to him. You don't have to come up. I know, he said. But I will. Caroline hesitated. You sure, Caroline? He said quietly. You brought applesauce to my daughter when she was sick. I can sit through brunch. Her mouth twitched into a nervous smile. This isn't brunch. When the elevator doors opened on the executive lounge, the tone shifted. The carpet was thicker here, the lighting softer. Everything reeked of understated wealth. At a corner table by the fireplace, Charles Whitmore sat beside his wife, Eleanor, both dressed in elegant neutrals like they'd stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. Neither of them rose when Caroline approached. They simply watched. You're late, Charles said. Caroline remained standing. We were working. Eleanor sipped her tea. You've been in the garage for 15 minutes. We had something to discuss privately, Caroline replied. Charles looked past her. Right at Micah. I see, Micah nodded politely. Mr. Whitmore. Mrs. Whitmore. Eleanor gave the smallest of nods. Charles didn't. Carolyn sat down slowly. Let's get to the point. You're making decisions without consulting the board, Charles said flatly. You've hired non-corporate staff into executive roles. You're restructuring without protocol. Caroline's voice stayed even. Within my rights as vice president. You are acting vice president. No, she said, locking eyes with him. I'm the one actually doing the job. Charles's eyes flicked to Micah again. And you think parading your handyman through the lobby like some kind of personal statement is helping your credibility? Micah felt the weight of that, but he didn't flinch. Not even a blink. Caroline's voice dropped. He's not a statement. He's the only person in this building I trust. And what about us? Eleanor asked, her tone sharper than her delicate jewelry suggested. Your family, Caroline looked between them. When I was 8 years old, I came to you crying because a boy at school called me plain. You told me to put on lipstick and never let them see me cry. She glanced at Micah, then back at her mother. I've been putting on lipstick ever since, and I'm tired. Charles leaned forward, voice low and cold. You think this man is going to make you happy? He doesn't belong in this world. Then maybe I don't either, Caroline said. Maybe I never did. Silence, long and bitter. Finally, Charles stood. I suggest you start thinking carefully about the future of this hotel, and your role in it. Caroline didn't move. I already have. He nodded once tight and measured. Then he and Eleanor left, not sparing Micah a second glance. The doors whispered shut behind them. Micah exhaled slowly. You okay? Caroline didn't answer for a long time. Then she said, I don't know what just happened. You stood up to your father. She turned to him, tears threatening, and it didn't feel like a victory. Micah sat down beside her, gently reaching for her hand. It will. When you wake up tomorrow and realize you didn't bend. She rested her head on his shoulder. Micah, she whispered, what if they try to take it all away? He looked down at her. Then we start again. From the river, from the truth. Her voice cracked. I don't know how to start over. You just did. That night, Micah carried Sophie to bed after reading her favorite bedtime story twice at her insistence. She was tired but happy, her fever gone, her curls damp from bath time. After tucking her in, he stepped out onto the balcony again, just like the night before. His phone buzzed. Carolyn, thank you for being beside me today, for not blinking. He texted back, Micah, you blinked enough for both of us. Then, Micah, I meant what I said. Whatever happens next, we face it together. She didn't reply right away. But when she did, it was just one word. Caroline Promise. He stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Then typed Micah Promise. He looked out at the lights of Savannah stretching quietly under the stars. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. Monday came faster than either of them expected. The calm of the weekend, the garden coffee, the river, the quiet understanding between Micah and Caroline felt like a memory half-lived as the week pushed forward. The Whitmore Grand buzzed with tension. Everyone felt it. Caroline knew why. Her father had made good on his silent warning. First came the whispers, then the meetings without her. Then the abrupt cancellation of the riverfront design presentation she'd spent months preparing. But she didn't flinch. Not publicly. Micah noticed the subtle changes, the tighter set of her jaw, the way she rubbed the bridge of her nose during calls, the way she stared at her screen, long after meetings ended. She was holding it all together. But she was holding it alone. By Tuesday afternoon, Jennifer cornered Micah outside the executive suite. She was holding a folder, but that wasn't why she'd stopped him. I know this isn't my place, she said carefully, but you need to know something. Micah waited. There's a closed-door session scheduled with the board tomorrow. Your name's on the agenda. Micah frowned. Why would they trying to rattle her, undermine her judgment? Micah's stomach sank. They think she's compromised. Jennifer nodded, lips tight. Caroline has power, but not absolute power. If the board decides she's letting personal matters interfere with corporate ones, they'll take it from her, Micah finished. Jennifer looked at him. She won't tell you. She thinks protecting you means shielding you from the fallout. Micah looked toward the office door. Thank you for telling me. Inside, Caroline was pacing, earbuds locked into a tense call. No, I'm not stepping down. I'm not adjusting the proposal either. The numbers speak for themselves. What's happening here isn't financial, it's personal. She pulled the earbuds out and tossed them onto the desk as Micah entered. He closed the door gently. You okay? She hesitated. Then sat. No, she admitted. I'm not. Micah walked over, sat across from her. They're moving in, she said. Quietly. Calculated. My father's trying to dismantle everything I've built without leaving fingerprints. You're not imagining it, Micah said softly. Jennifer told me about the board meeting tomorrow. Caroline's eyes flickered with frustration. I told her not to. She was right to. Silence. I don't want you caught in the crossfire, she said quietly. I already am. I can fix it. Micah reached across the desk, resting his hand over hers. Caroline, you don't have to fix me. She looked up, surprised. I didn't walk into this because I needed a rescue. I'm here because I see you, all of you, and I believe in what you're trying to do. Her throat tightened. They won't see that. Then show them something they can't ignore. Her brow furrowed. You told me this job started because you wanted someone who didn't care about appearances, he said. That's fine, but now it's time to remind them that appearances are their weakness, not yours. I don't play games, she said. You don't have to, Micah replied. You just have to stop apologizing for not fitting into theirs. That night, Caroline went home early for the first time in weeks. She spent 2 hours combing through numbers, emails, old press clippings, every scrap of leverage and legitimacy she could find. Not to manipulate, just to clarify. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was building a case for a boardroom. She felt like she was building a case for herself. Meanwhile, Micah stayed up late, sketching. It was something he hadn't done in years, not since Sophie was a baby, and he'd spent quiet nights designing what their future might look like. He pulled out an old sketchbook and flipped past water-stained pages until he found a clean one. Then he began to draw lines and ideas and space, not just a building, a space that held people, people like Sophie, people like them, a hotel wing, a courtyard, a community space, something more. The next morning, Carolyn walked into the boardroom, not with her father's shadow looming behind her, but with quiet steel in her spine. Her navy suit was sharper than usual, her hair pulled back, no makeup except a subtle red lip. Micah didn't walk in with her, but he was waiting just outside the doors. Inside, Charles sat at the head of the long table flanked by gray-haired men and women who had once smiled at Caroline like a niece or a daughter. Today, they smiled like lawyers. The chairman cleared his throat. Ms. Whitmore, thank you for joining us. We've reviewed the situation regarding your recent hires and relationships within the executive team. Concerns have been raised. With respect, Caroline interrupted, I'd like to begin with the numbers. There was a pause. Then she handed out printed packets to each board member. No drama, just facts. Since Mr. Dawson began working in his new role, she said, our internal operations timeline has accelerated by 12%. Vendor satisfaction scores are up. Staff retention in his former department has stabilized. And this, she tapped a page, is a community grant proposal he helped draft. One that aligns with our riverfront project's long-term vision. More silence. I didn't hire him because of nostalgia, she continued, and I didn't fall in love with him because of charity. The room shifted. I fell in love with someone who reminds me why I started this job in the first place. No one breathed. I know some of you are uncomfortable with that, but discomfort isn't misconduct. And if you're more concerned with headlines than performance, then I invite you to review the data again. Because what we're building together is bigger than gossip. Outside the door, Micah heard nothing, but he felt it. Later, as the boardroom emptied and Caroline stepped into the hallway, she found him waiting, eyes searching hers. Well, he asked. She exhaled, slow and full. I think they blinked first. Micah grinned, and for the first time in days, so did she. The morning after the board meeting felt different. Not louder, not calmer, just clearer. Carolyn stood in the hotel's garden courtyard before anyone else arrived, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold. The hedges were still damp from last night's rain, and the fountain trickled quietly nearby. Above her, the early savannah light pressed through the clouds like it was deciding whether to stay or go. She wasn't sure if she'd won anything yesterday. But for the first time, she hadn't backed down. And that counted. She didn't hear Micah approach, but she knew it was him when she felt a jacket drape over her shoulders. "You looked cold," he said softly. She smiled without turning. "I am." Micah stepped beside her, his coffee still steaming. "They left you alone," he said. "That's something." "They're regrouping," she said. "I could feel it. This isn't over, it's just—" Paused. He nodded. "Then we breathe while we can." Caroline glanced at him, eyes a little tired but steady. "I meant what I said yesterday. All of it." Micah didn't speak for a second. "Then so did I." She looked down at her hands. "You know, there's a version of this where we burn it all down just by standing too close to each other." Micah laughed under his breath. "Sounds dramatic. It is. And are you scared of that?" Caroline met his eyes. "A little." "Good," he said. "That means it matters." Later that day, Caroline returned to her desk to find an envelope waiting for her. No label, no signature, just her name. Inside was a simple note typed neatly, "No one falls forever." But they do fall fast. Her fingers tensed around the paper. Micah walked in just as she was rereading it. "What's that?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was calm but clipped. A warning. He frowned. "From who? My father, probably, or one of the board members." "It doesn't matter." Micah stepped closer. "It does matter. That's not just business. That's a threat." Caroline folded the note slowly and tucked it into a drawer. "They want me to flinch. You don't have to deal with this alone." She looked at him, something fragile behind her eyes. "I don't know how to not deal with things alone." Micah moved to the edge of her desk, resting his hand over hers. "Then let me teach you." Before she could answer, her phone rang. It was Sophie's school. Again. Caroline picked it up, concern flickering in her features. "Hi, yes, this is Caroline Whitmore." "Is she okay?" Micah straightened alert. Caroline listened, then smiled in relief. No, it's fine. I'll be right there." "Thank you." She hung up and looked at Micah. Art project accident. Glue in her hair. He laughed. "That sounds about right. She's fine. But she asked if I could come pick her up." Micah blinked. "She asked for you." Caroline nodded, her smile softening. "Apparently I've been promoted." 20 minutes later, she was back at the elementary school, walking through the halls that smelled like crayons and cafeteria pizza. Sophie spotted her from across the front office and ran to her, still holding a glitter-covered popsicle stick. "I told them you'd come." She beamed. Carolyn knelt, brushing a sticky strand of hair from her forehead. "Of course I did. Let's go get you cleaned up, Picasso." In the car, Sophie chattered the whole way back about her teacher, about glue, about how she was saving her popsicle stick for Micah, because he likes blue things. Caroline smiled, but her mind was elsewhere. Not on hotel politics, not on boardroom tension, but on this child in the back seat, this little life who had chosen to trust her without question. She didn't know what that meant, but she knew it meant something. That evening, back at the hotel, Micah was waiting outside the suite when Caroline returned with Sophie. He crouched down, arms open wide. "Troublemaker?" he said as she ran into his arms. "You outglued the whole class again?" Sophie giggled. "Miss Rebecca said I was very enthusiastic." Micah laughed. "That's my girl." Caroline stood quietly watching them. Micah looked up, his expression softening. "You okay?" Caroline nodded. "She picked me." His smile deepened. "Yeah, she does that." Later that night, after Sophie had fallen asleep in the guest room, her curls still smelling faintly of bubblegum shampoo, Caroline stood on the balcony with Micah. The city lights twinkled below. She asked if I was her new mom. Caroline said suddenly. Micah turned slowly. What did you say? I said no, but that I cared about her very much. Micah leaned on the railing beside her. That was the right answer. I didn't want to lie, but I didn't want to scare her either. She's resilient, he said, more than I ever expected. But she's also open. She feels everything big. Caroline looked at him, voice barely above a whisper. Like someone else I know. Micah chuckled, shaking his head. Don't give me too much credit. You don't take enough. The wind picked up slightly, brushing past them, carrying the sound of traffic and distant music from the square. Micah turned to her. What happens now? She didn't answer right away. Then she looked up. Now. I stop waiting for approval I never needed. I fight for what I know is right. And I let the people who love me actually help. Micah reached out, brushing his fingers against hers. And us. She looked down, interlaced her fingers with his. We keep going. Micah smiled, and for the first time in days, the weight that had been sitting on both of their chests lifted just enough for them to breathe. Together. The sky over Savannah was thick with the weight of summer heat clouds, heavy, but still holding back the storm. Micah stood on the rooftop garden, glancing down at the city that had both held and humbled him. Below the Whitmore Grand shimmered in the sun-glass, gleaming polished brass doors, spinning endlessly. From here, everything looked in place, but everything was not in place. He checked his phone again. No text, no call. No word from Caroline since last night. She'd been quiet after the board follow-up meeting, too quiet. Her voice had been measured when she told him it was just a formality, but Micah could hear the strain tucked under her words. Something had shifted. Again. He looked up as the door behind him opened. It wasn't Caroline. Jennifer. She's in the ballroom, she said. Alone. Micah blinked. Ballroom. Why? Jennifer hesitated. Her father brought in a private consultant, someone from a firm in New York. They're calling it a strategic realignment. He narrowed his eyes. She's being pushed out. Jennifer didn't answer. She didn't have to. Micah moved without another word, taking the stairs 2 at a time. The ballroom was dark, except for the lights near the back where Caroline stood under a single chandelier, flipping through a thick file of documents on a linen-covered table. She didn't look up when he entered. Micah stepped closer. I thought we were past this part. Caroline's fingers stilled on the edge of the folder. So did I, she said quietly. But it turns out, legacy is heavier than truth. Micah approached slowly, reading her body, her silence. What happened? She closed the folder and turned to face him. They're offering me a buyout. A generous one. Clean exit. No drama, just disappear quietly. His jaw clenched. That's not what you've worked for. No, she said, voice sharper now. But they don't care. They see me as noise. And this us, it only gives them more ammunition. Micah stepped closer. You think this is your fault? I think I let myself believe I could change a system that was never built to include people like me. Micah stared at her heart, thudding. Caroline, you are the system. You built this place from the inside out. You gave people chances. You fought for things that mattered. And look where it got me. It got you to me. To Sophie. To something that finally feels real. She shook her head. What if I've just dragged you into a fight I was never meant to win? Micah's voice dropped. Then we lose together. But we lose knowing. Caroline's shoulders dropped slightly, her eyes filling. Micah, I don't want to walk away from this, but I also can't keep choosing it if it means watching everything I care about get used against me. He looked at her for a long moment. Then quietly, So choose you. Her breath caught. Choose the version of yourself that doesn't wait for permission to lead. The one who takes risks, who shows up when people least expect her to, who doesn't wait for her father's approval to be powerful. Caroline swallowed hard. Micah stepped closer. You don't have to fight the whole system. Just stay standing in the middle of it long enough to show people how it can be different. She looked up at him. And if I fall, Micah took her hand. Then I'm falling too. For a long time, the ballroom was silent, the kind of silence where everything is spoken without needing sound. Then Caroline whispered, I think I'm in love with you. Micah didn't blink. I know, he said. And I love you too. And just like that, everything else, the titles, the legacy, the power, faded into the background. Because for the first time, they weren't fighting for a hotel. They were fighting for each other. The next morning, the air at the Whitmore Grand felt still, not quiet. Still. Like a breath was being held across the entire building. Caroline stood at the edge of the main conference hall, staring at the set of doors that would open into the quarterly stakeholder briefing, an event usually orchestrated by her father, complete with polished PR scripts, projected revenue charts, and carefully planted applause. But today it was hers. Micah stood behind her close, but not too close, his presence steady, quietly grounding her. You ready? He asked. She didn't turn around. No, but I'm doing it anyway. He smiled softly. Then you're ready enough. Jennifer peeked out from the side of the double doors. They're all seated. Caroline nodded. Her heart was pounding, but her face didn't show it. Inside the room was full. Board members, shareholders, hotel department heads, press. Her father sat in the second row, arms crossed, expression unreadable. As she walked up to the podium, there were murmurs. She could feel the energy, some curious, some skeptical others bracing for something dramatic. She adjusted the mic, took a breath, and looked out at the room. I wasn't supposed to be here today, she began. In fact, a few days ago, I was offered a very generous exit package to make sure I wouldn't be. The room stilled. But I'm here. Not because I want to be combative, and not because I think I'm irreplaceable. I'm here because I believe in this place, in the people who keep it running, and in the kind of future we could have if we let go of the fear that's been driving our decisions. A few board members shifted, whispering behind their hands. Caroline continued, her voice stronger now. For years, this hotel has operated with legacy as its compass. Family names, social connections, appearances. But the truth is, legacy without evolution is just repetition. She looked directly at her father, not with anger, but with something deeper. Resolve. I've made mistakes. I've trusted the wrong people at times. But I've also listened. I've adapted. I've welcomed people who weren't part of the usual mold, and every time I did, we got stronger. She clicked a remote and brought up a slide behind her. Metrics, engagement, community initiatives, operational improvements. It wasn't fluff, it was fact. This isn't about me, or about titles. This is about direction. She paused. I'm not asking for applause. I'm not even asking for agreement. I'm simply telling you this: I'm staying, and I'm leading. Not for the name on the building, but for the people who walk through its doors every day, guests, staff, and everyone in between. There was a long, weighted silence. Then from the back of the room, someone clapped. It was Gregory, head of maintenance. Then came 2 front desk staff. Then more. A ripple, not thunderous, but honest. Caroline stepped down from the podium, heart pounding. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't glance at her father. She walked out of the room the same way she walked in, shoulders back, spine straight, eyes clear. Micah was waiting just outside. You didn't flinch, he said quietly. She exhaled slow. I wanted to. But you didn't. Caroline looked up at him. I meant what I said. I'm not doing this for legacy anymore. Micah reached into his bag and pulled out a sketchbook. I want to show you something. She furrowed her brow but opened it. Inside were plans, loose drawings, a blueprint that wasn't architectural, it was personal. A new project, he said. Mixed-use space, community-led hospitality, rooms, yes, but also classrooms, art space, gardens, a new kind of hotel, one that gives something back. Caroline blinked. You drew this. I stayed up after Sophie went to sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about what we could build if we stopped trying to fit inside something broken. She turned a page slowly. This could work. Micah nodded. I know. And I want to do it with you, as partners. Not just here, but wherever life takes us next. Her eyes lifted to meet his. I've never built anything with someone before, she said. It's always been me, trying to keep everything from falling apart. He stepped closer. Then maybe it's time to build something that doesn't need holding up. And for the first time in her life, Caroline didn't feel like she was falling. She felt like she was rising. It was almost dusk when Caroline pulled into the gravel drive just outside the old carriage house, now converted into a community workshop on the edge of Savannah's historic district. She turned off the engine and sat there for a second, watching the light shift across the windshield. Something about this place, the rawness of it, the honesty, felt like standing in the middle of who she used to be. Before suits and boardrooms and curated statements, Micah had told her to meet him here. No hints, no context, just, you'll see. She stepped inside, and the scent of sawdust and citrus cleaner met her instantly. Her heels echoed against the old wood floor, scuffed and stained with years of work. Sunlight poured through the open garage-style doors in the back, and under the beam of it stood Micah. Sleeves rolled up, hands slightly dirty, bent over what looked like a child-sized bench. Sophie sat beside him, legs swinging, watching him with a kind of wonder only kids could pull off. Caroline froze in the doorway. Micah looked up and smiled. Perfect timing. Sophie jumped off the bench and ran over, holding something behind her back. Close your eyes. Caroline blinked. Why? Because it's a surprise. She did. Sophie placed something soft and small into her hand. Okay. Open. Caroline opened her eyes and saw a handmade pillow, crooked, stitching a sun drawn in fabric marker and the word home written in capital letters across the center. Her breath caught. I made it for your new couch, Sophie said. In the house you don't have yet. Caroline knelt slowly, her throat tight. Sophie. It's beautiful, the little girl beamed. Daddy said you might need reminding, that some things don't have to be perfect to be real. Caroline looked over at Micah, who only shrugged gently. I was hoping you'd come early, he said. I wanted you to see this place before it's finished. What is it? She asked softly, still clutching the pillow. Our start, he said. The space I told you about. This is where we build it from. She stood and walked further into the room, turning in slow circles, taking in the raw beams, the open sky through the rafters in the back. The place wasn't polished. It wasn't branded. It was honest. Micah leaned against the frame of the doorway. We could build something new here, Caroline. Not as a statement, not to prove anything, just because it's time. She turned to face him. And what about everything we're leaving behind? He took a slow breath. Sometimes you don't leave it behind. You carry the pieces that matter, and you let go of the ones that were only holding you in place. She looked down at the pillow again. Home. It was clumsy, slightly stained, a little too stuffed on one side, but it was hers, and it was real. Micah stepped forward and reached for her hand. We don't have to decide everything tonight, but I want you to know, this isn't just an idea. It's a promise. She looked up at him. I'm scared. I know. I don't know how to do this. Good. Then we'll figure it out the real way. They stood there for a long time, the sounds of the evening humming softly around them, distant cars, birds settling into trees. Sophie humming as she rearranged the small pile of scrap fabric on the floor. And in that moment, Caroline realized something. She wasn't waiting anymore. Not for her father's approval, not for the board's permission, not for the right moment. This was the right moment, even if it was messy, even if it didn't follow the script, because it was hers. Oaken River, she said suddenly. Micah raised an eyebrow. What? For the name, she said. The new place. It's grounded and flowing. Something strong, something moving. His smile bloomed slowly. Oak and River. It's the kind of place people won't just visit, she said. They'll remember it, like a feeling. Micah nodded. Then let's make it real. And just like that, the blueprint in his sketchbook had its first piece of real-world foundation. Not cement, not nails, but belief. Choice, and love raw, imperfect, enduring. The kind you don't find by staying still. The kind you build by saying, I found you. And I'm not letting go. A week passed. The kind of week that wasn't glamorous or dramatic, but real. The kind filled with paint-streaked jeans, takeout boxes on folding chairs, and long evenings spent sorting through fabric swatches and permit applications. The kind of week where everything felt like work, but none of it felt heavy. Caroline hadn't checked her inbox in 2 days, and she didn't miss it. Micah spent his mornings meeting with local craftsmen, people who knew the bones of Savannah better than any contractor from out of state. Caroline found herself learning their names, shaking their hands, asking questions she never used to ask. Real questions. About time, about materials, about what it would take to build something that would last. It was a rhythm she hadn't known she needed, and somehow Sophie was always in the middle of it, sitting cross-legged on the workshop floor, coloring new logo ideas or dragging a step stool around so she could help sweep up sawdust. She'd started calling it our place without even realizing it. One afternoon, Caroline stood outside what would become the lobby of Oak and River. The sun was pouring through the frame of the open front wall, casting soft rectangles of light across the dusty floor. She heard footsteps behind her. Micah. He came up quietly, 2 cold lemonades in hand. You looked like someone deep in a thought spiral, he said, passing her a glass. She admitted. I was just imagining this room. Finished. What does it look like? She stared ahead. Warm, not fancy, but beautiful in a way people don't expect. He smiled. Sounds like someone I know. Carolyn glanced at him. I've spent most of my life trying to impress people who never actually looked at me. Micah didn't speak, just listened. And now? She let out a breath. Now I'm standing in a building that doesn't exist yet with a man who saw me when I wasn't even trying. That feels terrifying. Why? Because what if I get it wrong? What if I build this whole thing and no one comes? Micah took a sip of his lemonade, then looked at her. Carolyn, people will come. How do you know? Because it has you in it. She felt tears rise unexpectedly sharp. Micah reached out and brushed his thumb just beneath her eye. And because for the first time you're building from something true, not legacy, not pressure, just heart. She didn't speak, just leaned her head into his chest, letting the silence hold them. Across the room, Sophie peeked around the corner with a grin, then ducked back before they saw her. That night they ate dinner on the floor of the unfinished lobby. Chinese takeout, 2 tiny candles for mood lighting, and a blanket that smelled faintly of fresh-cut wood. Halfway through the meal, Caroline's phone buzzed. She almost didn't check it. But curiosity got the better of her. She stared at the screen for a long second before speaking. "It's from my father." Micah looked up. "What's it say?" She read it once. Then again, her expression unreadable. Then she handed him the phone. "You made your point. And it's working. You're doing something I couldn't. You're making them believe, even me." Micah looked up slowly. "That's not nothing." "No," she said. "It's not." She sat back, crossing her legs beneath her. "He won't apologize. Not with words, but that's probably as close as he gets." Micah nodded. "You okay?" She considered that for a moment. "I think I'm finally starting to be." There was a pause. Then she looked over at him. "Can I ask you something, always? Do you ever feel like maybe this is too good? Like maybe we're tempting fate by actually being happy?" Micah didn't laugh. He didn't brush it off. He nodded quietly. "Yeah, I do." She tilted her head. And then I remember, we didn't find this. We fought for it. Every inch, every scar, every risk. And I think maybe we've earned a little peace." Caroline looked down at her hands. "I don't know how to live in peace." Micah reached over, lacing his fingers with hers. "Then let's learn together." The last light of evening dipped behind the rooftops outside. Inside, surrounded by dust and wood, and possibility, two people who once stood on opposite ends of the world sat side by side, tired, messy, and undeniably whole. And for the first time in years, neither of them looked back. The morning of the grand opening came quietly. No red carpets, no press junkets, no orchestra swelling in the background. Just sunlight, warm and golden, pouring through the large windows of oak and river, casting soft shapes on the freshly polished floors. The scent of new wood and blooming magnolia filled the air. Carolyn stood in the front courtyard, watching the final touches come together, mismatched chairs being arranged around the cafe tables, strings of soft lights flickering on as the sun crept higher. A local guitarist strummed gently in the corner, warming up for the first guests. She ran her fingers along the edge of the front desk, handmade from reclaimed heart pine, and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Behind her, Micah walked out carrying a small framed photo. He handed it to her without a word. Inside was a picture of the three of them, Carolyn, Micah, and Sophie, taken 2 nights ago. Sophie had insisted on setting the timer. They were sitting on the porch swing, wind in their hair, laughter mid-burst, the kind of photo that wasn't posed, just honest. Carolyn stared at it for a long second, then looked up at him. "We did it." Micah smiled, eyes soft. "You did it." She shook her head. Sophie came bounding out of the house wearing a lopsided name tag she'd made herself. "Greeter-in-Chief," it read. She ran to Micah, tugging his hand. "People are coming, I saw a van." Micah lifted her up and spun her once. "Then we better get ready, boss." As guests trickled in, Caroline greeted each one like they were old friends. Couples from out of town, local artists who'd helped paint the mural in the back garden, even her former assistant Jennifer, who now managed events at the space. One of the board members from Whitmore Grand arrived unexpectedly, walked the grounds in quiet awe, then simply said, "You were right before leaving," with a nod. Caroline didn't need more than that. By afternoon, the place was humming. Kids laughed in the community room where story time was underway. Elderly neighbors sat with coffee in the garden. A woman from out of state asked about booking a retreat in the fall. A college student from down the street offered to volunteer. The space had come alive in a way that couldn't be faked. It belonged. And so did she. Later that evening, when the crowd had thinned and the lights glowed soft and low, Caroline found herself standing on the back patio alone, arms crossed against the cool night air. Micah came up behind her and slipped his arms around her waist. "You disappeared," he murmured. "I needed a minute." He pressed a kiss to her shoulder. You okay? She nodded. I don't think I believed I'd ever see this day. I did, he said softly. Caroline turned to him. I was so afraid of being seen as a failure, of not becoming what everyone expected me to be. Micah tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. You didn't become what they expected. You became more. She blinked hard, then laughed a little. You're good at this, he grinned. Only with you. They sat down on the edge of the wooden steps, looking out at the garden where fairy lights flickered like stars. Sophie had fallen asleep in one of the hammocks earlier, curled up with a children's book still resting on her chest. Jennifer had draped a blanket over her. She's going to remember this place, Caroline whispered. Not because it's fancy, but because it's safe. Micah nodded. That's all I've ever wanted for her. Carolyn leaned her head on his shoulder. Me too. For both of us. Silence fell again, the kind that comes at the end of something long and hard fought. Not empty, just full in a different way. And then Caroline whispered, I used to think love came with rules, that I had to earn it, prove I was worthy, fit a role. Micah didn't move, just waited. But now I think, maybe love is what happens when you stop performing, when someone sees you, really sees you, and still stays. He looked down at her eyes full. I'm not going anywhere. She smiled. I know. And that was enough. The next morning before the sun even rose, Carolyn woke to the smell of coffee and soft jazz playing from the kitchen. Micah was making breakfast. Sophie padded in on socked feet, rubbing her eyes. Carolyn stood in the doorway, watching them. This man, this child, this life, everything once impossible now settled into place, like it had been waiting for her all along. She stepped forward, wrapped her arms around them both, and whispered, I found you. Micah turned, kissed her forehead, and whispered back, I found you first. There was no applause, no spotlight, just love. Built not on perfection, but on choice. On choosing each other every day, and maybe that was the real legacy.